So Nick, this is probably something that you didn't know about Coach. He's an elk whisperer, right? So I wanted to get into that first before we even touch wrestling. So,
Well,
Coach, yeah, you want to talk about your experience with the elk?
well, I can tell you about my experiences with elk. Is we live here in the Pacific Northwest, and we have big herds that come through at the coast, and we also have some pretty big herds that come through up in the valley. And I at one time found an abandoned elk baby, a calf that was abandoned by the herd because they usually keep moving, and if they got an injured calf, they usually just abandon it because it would slow down the whole herd. So my son and I went out and picked up a little elk, and we took her back to the house, and we started raising her and feeding her from our neighbors' goats. They had some goats, so we went and got some milk from them, and eventually that elk was drinking so much milk that we had to go get a lactating goat to be our mama. And so basically we kind of raised her up until she was about 8 months old, and she joined back up with the herd when it came through in the fall.
Wow, that's really cool. That's a really interesting story, and to raise such a magnificent beast. I mean, those things get huge. That's pretty crazy that you're able to nurse it back to health and let it go back to its herd.
Yeah, it was interesting. I didn't know if it was if she was going to kind of become a domesticated animal, and we were going to have to uh, keep her or slaughter her or something, but she actually joined back up with the herd and left with the herd. So it was nice. I think Logan was asking me that because he was following my Instagram stories where I was just kind of giving evening reports of the elk herd here on the property.
Oh, nice. I know Brad Anderson and Randy go on those like elk hunting trips. Do you go along with them?
I've never hunted an elk
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
myself, but I do know, yeah, Brad and Randy have been doing that for years um, in Colorado. I don't know if they've hunted any of the bigger ones out here in the Pacific Northwest, but I do know those guys are big elk hunters, and I've heard about their trips, but I've never actually gone out and tried to kill one.
Gotcha.
Yeah, no, I think the nurturing aspect is a lot cooler. So
Yeah, that's
that's an
pretty
awesome
cool.
story. But it also kind of brings up the type of questions we have, right? So we have a lot of like lifestyle questions about your journey in Greco and kind of what it looks like for kids coming up to want to choose Greco when it's kind of not the normal way that's seen in America. So our first official question would be, how did you get started with Greco-Roman wrestling?
Well, I was very fortunate that when I started wrestling in high school, um, right after the high school season, there was an invitation to go to an international styles tournament, Greco and freestyle. I didn't fare very well at it. I ended up, I think I was 0-8 that weekend after my first international event. I'd wrestled a high school season, which is the folk style rules, and then I went and showed up at that event, and I was able to compete, and I must have hit the age group to where I was able to compete in cadets and juniors, so I was able to get my ass kicked twice as much. But after that event, I looked up on the podium throughout the event and was seeing where the athletes were coming from, which clubs, and so I ended up finding my way to that gym, and that was at that time it was the USA Oregon club, and I think that it's referred to now more as the Cobra Club or USA Cobras, but at that time it was just the USA Oregon Athletic Club.
Wow. That that sounds pretty like in line with, I guess, how I would imagine people starting with Greco, because if you're doing folk style your entire life, there's no chance that you're just going to step out into a Greco match and you know put the guy away 8-0 your first time. Some people are talented, but is a pretty like humbling beginning, I would say, for a lot of USA wrestlers or folk style wrestlers to try Greco first.
Well, I think the sport of wrestling is pretty humbling in itself, but I think you're right. I think some people get their ego caught up in their success in a certain style, and they have a hard time making that adjustment. We've seen it over and over. We've seen, the guys that our culture, wrestling wise, the American culture says they're the best guys, NCAA champions, jump out into the sport of Greco without the proper training and preparation, and they don't have the success, and they feel as though they're due, they're entitled. I think it's just like anything. You got to put your time in, you got to put the work in, put the effort and stuff. But the fortunate thing about the club that I joined was there was senior athletes that were wrestling there. Some of them were my size, like Mark Fuller, who was a 3-time Olympian. He was training out of that same room, so I got to work with a guy that had already been on a couple Olympic teams at the time I started training. Anthony Amato was there training. Uh, Travis West was another athlete that was on an Olympic team here in my era during that generation. So we just had a lot of guys that were either on national teams, world teams, or Olympic teams training in and out of that same environment. And so when you're training alongside those athletes every day, you end up getting a reality check of, well, I'm not at that level, but I'm training. You also know that you're in the right environment, because if these guys could get to that level of success training in the same environment, you know that it's a possibility, and that's all you need. You just need to know that there's a possibility that if I put this much time and effort into my craft, that I could potentially have success. And there's no guarantees in this sport whatsoever.
Yeah, going into that sort of club where you have such elite athletes, having the opportunity to train with them, was there anything that you learned from them, or any aspects of Greco specifically that drew you to that style, to where you thought, this is the style for me out of all 3 styles, like this is the one that I'm going to commit to like 100%?
No, I don't think that is necessarily the case, because just because of the culture said that okay, well, if you want to make an Olympic team, here's what Dan Gable did. He went and wrestled, in college for 4 years, and then after that, he started making Olympic teams. And I don't think that's necessarily the facts. I don't think that's how it has to be done. I think there's many routes to get to your goals, but I was following the standard protocol that was set by the previous athletes, the coaching staff, and saying that this is how you do it. So I knew that eventually I needed to go to a college program uh, based on that. But I think my opinion has definitely changed in that time. I during that process, I went from after I got out of high school, I went to college, and I started out at junior college. And coming out of junior college, I was recruited to wrestle in Division One. I was recruited to wrestle in D2 schools, but the D2 offer was very enticing in the fact that Dave Miller at Ferris State had invited me to be his training partner for Greco-Roman, and he was coaching a college team at the same time. But it was a harder decision to make than just okay, this is where I want to wrestle in college, because I was really thinking about long term, knowing that these 4 years leading up to this next quad are going to prepare me for success at making teams and getting on Olympic teams and getting medals. But that wasn't necessarily the case. It ended up taking another 4 years to actually complete that journey.
Now, with this journey going forward, what sort of, new traits did you develop from going from high school to the junior college, and then going to wrestle with the Coach Miller at Ferris State? And
I never ended up going out there.
oh,
I was recruited there. I ended up actually going to Nebraska.
oh, okay.
Yeah, and that was we could talk about kind of that journey to Nebraska, and then I ended up going back there to coach, and that's where I was training out of when I made the Olympic team and won a silver medal in Sydney. Was I was still training in Nebraska, but I mean there was a lot of different options now for athletes where they could go to Northern Michigan and wrestle full-time Greco-Roman. We don't have a lot of full-time Greco-Roman programs in our
Yeah.
country, so if you do find yourself up there, you've pretty much made a commitment to yourself that's the style you want to focus on. Um, we have guys like Colton Schultz who's decided to wrestle Division One while still pursuing his Olympic aspirations simultaneously. And I think at heavyweight, if that's probably a better weight class that you could actually have a lot more success at that. And Colton's just a great wrestler overall. Um, but the general philosophy has always been, well, wrestling's wrestling, and these skills are all transferable. Well, they are transferable, but there's a lot of time you're spending in areas that maybe develop some bad habits for Greco-Roman, like bending at the waist and moving backwards, because Greco requires more of an upright stance and pressure forward. So it's a little different. But no, I ended up actually choosing to go to Nebraska because I thought if I was going to wrestle in college, I wanted to give myself the best chance of success in college wrestling as well as the Olympic styles.
Now, did you wrestle? Did you compete in the freestyle Greco during the summer? Did you specialize in Greco or after your folk style season? What sort of decisions did you make during your college career to get to where you were now?
Okay, that's a good question. Yeah, I always tried to make it to all the events that were available, especially the domestic events. I didn't get enough opportunities to wrestle internationally while I was in college. That's something I wish I would have really forced more myself to do more, is get overseas. But I just didn't have the support to do that. I don't think other people on my team or my coaches really understood that wrestling in the Olympic Games was a reality and was a possibility. I think too many athletes, undersell themselves. They say it and oh yeah, I want to wrestle in the games. I want to, be on a world team or win a medal at the Worlds or the Olympics, but they don't do the right things. And I don't think at that time necessarily I was doing the right things, but I don't think I had the mentorship to guide me in that direction at that time, because you got to think about what college coaches their whole purpose is to get their athletes to be the best they can in the college style of wrestling. And if they feel like you're spending more time in the international styles, maybe that would take away from your success in college. I don't know if that's truly the case. I think it would definitely benefit guys more to think at a higher competitive level, to think what's beyond college wrestling and looking to push themselves to the international levels. I think they could definitely have some more success. But I certainly made it to all those events. Our university nationals was kind of that age division that we focus on now with the college athletes, which is now U23, um, which is probably a better age group for college athletes, to tell you the truth. I think the university age group used to go up to 27. You're definitely out of college by that time.
Yeah, no, that would be an interesting, height to the age division, because I mean there are a lot of people who still want to compete while they're in university that are getting higher education degrees. So that would be pretty good to see. So it gives more people the chance to compete. And I think that would be a great opportunity for growth within, especially I think in Greco, to have those sort of opportunities.
And we're definitely trying to create more of those opportunities as a national program, and our numbers doubled last year in our university national tournament from the year before, and we'll see this year. This is a very unique year with this pandemic going on that could really affect our numbers, because a lot of these athletes uh, are still in their school, still training with their college programs, and then come to the tournament, and then go back and usually finish their finals. Now everybody's been out of school, off the mat, So I think this is really going to skew our numbers of participants this year. But there is a lot of opportunities for guys, and maybe there's some athletes out there that have not had the success that they would like in college or freestyle, and maybe they should definitely give Greco-Roman a try and see if it fits their style of wrestling more, because I think that's really what it comes down to. When you see the athletes that actually choose to compete in Greco-Roman, it's just something fits their style. They like the pressure of wrestling Greco. They like the lifts. They like the parterre turns, or maybe they're great pummelers or throwers. Like Logan, he's explosive, athletic guy, and I think that's what's drawn him to Greco. He's got a natural aptitude for it. He doesn't mind standing straight up there. So he's been nice to have in our room and training along our side of our athletes, because he's pretty fearless. That's definitely a quality you need to have in Greco-Roman. You got to be willing to get in there, and both guys are in a position to score, and you got to just be willing to take that risk. And that's what the rules of international are all based around: risk. And it's really antithetical to the college style, which is you're rewarded almost more for inactivity. The less you do, the less risk you take, the more you're rewarded in the college system. Totally different philosophically, in their rule set.
Yeah, no,
Yeah.
go ahead, Logan. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah, I was gonna say, as a competitor, I can definitely like attest to that, because in folk style, it being stingy is a good thing, right? You don't want to give away points, but you're also forfeiting, opportunities to score. Some people have different styles that are like more fun to watch, and they can score a lot of points, but typically that's the strategy, and Greco is completely different. And so for someone that crossed over, it's that fearlessness he was talking about, like that's definitely a thing. Like you have to get over like being able to be thrown, but to have the experience of folk style and understand wrestling actually makes it easier to try something like Greco, because of the concepts, right? You just understand the concepts of wrestling. But yeah, no, it's pretty spot on, and it definitely helps having people that are practicing Greco to wrestle with if you're trying to become better as a wrestler overall, whichever style you choose.
Certainly, I mean, it's definitely a lot of our sport is about, we call it the feel. We want to get the right feel, the right reactions. We want our opponents, our training partners, we want them in the same positions they would be in a Greco-Roman match versus a folk style type of match.
Now, I wanted to kind of touch back on the U23. You're saying that the numbers had doubled. What would you attribute to the growth in those numbers? I know, the coaches like Gary Mayap have been doing an excellent job with the clinics and the camps and getting a lot of exposure. And, publications like 5 Point Move with Tim Hands have been giving a lot more information so that people can learn about the style. Is there anything else you might attribute to that growth and hopefully to see, more growth throughout the years?
Well, I think you're right. I think I definitely feel that having our own platform, our own media platform with 5 Point Move helps. Certainly, Coach Mayab getting out, um, going to college programs, going to the RTCs. We've been trying to build RTCs within our college programs. You'll see programs now like Cornell, who's committed, Rob Cole and his staff who've committed to supporting Greco-Roman athletes, and that's been a bit of a pushback with a lot of college programs, as they want to focus on freestyle, because they can look at that and they can visually see, well, both these guys are bent over, they're both grabbing legs, so it's going to make more sense to coaches and athletes that have never competed in Greco-Roman that this will transfer their skills better. But there's a lot of different subsets of skills that you're going to develop wrestling Greco, that you're going to learn better. You're going to learn how to throw guys better. You're going to learn how to score going backwards, because everything in freestyle and folk style is forward and through your opponent. And a lot of our stuff is rotational and arching and throwing backwards. So there's a lot of skill sets. We used to call it the 7 basic skills: stance, motion, penetration, lift, back step, back arch. And out of those 7 basic skills, I see back step and back arch being not taught as much in the American style system. But traditionally, when I was growing up, that was part of the curriculum. You had to have a back step, because there's times where you're going backwards and you need to score, and you don't always have that opportunity to drive through your opponent. So I think that it will definitely develop some skill sets for athletes that maybe they aren't taught in other areas. They haven't had an opportunity to use, for sure. So all positive things for athletes. But to go back to your question, what's changed the growth? I think it's just like you said, more college programs starting to support what we're doing. RTC in Illinois has Travis Rice, and they're recruiting other athletes now. Stanford's had a lot of their athletes have success in Greco-Roman, and they're sending their athletes to juniors and U23 type events. Utah Valley's been very supportive of us, but there's a handful of schools. One way out east, one way out west, a couple right in the middle, but not every program does not have a Greco-Roman RTC like most programs will have a freestyle regional training center.
Right. I actually have a question about because I explained like having that feel and like being able to convert because I have a feel for wrestling. But how do you bring new wrestlers into Greco? Like European countries, like they start out doing it there, right? So it's easier when you have a culture behind it. But how do you explain Greco to someone that's never done it before and get them interested?
I think that's pretty standard of tradition. I think that's what good coaches do is they get their athletes in the room, they expose them to all styles of wrestling, whether it's freestyle, folk style, Greco-Roman, submission style. They just expose their athletes to more opportunities of training, of camps, of competition. But it's difficult to send athletes to competition without having the proper training. So you got to create that environment in your training room and give athletes a chance to train Greco-Roman. And there are college programs and kids programs and high school programs all across the country that are doing that. And it's us empowering more coaches. We've got some really great superstar volunteer coaches out there, like Nate Engel, who was Coach of the Year this year, who's he's coaching out at Stanford. He was before that he was at Air Force. He's been all over the place, but everywhere he goes, he brings Greco-Roman into that college environment and exposes athletes to it. So it's just constantly we have to develop more coaches, because if you focus on developing the athlete, you're going to get one athlete at a time. If you focus on empowering coaches and training coaches and getting coaches to put Greco-Roman into their training environments, you're going to expose a lot more athletes, because those coaches are going to be able to impact way more athletes than just individually.
Now, is there anything you would like to see to create more Greco-Roman coaches? Because I know a lot of the apprehension with traditional folk style coaches is, they don't fully understand how the style works, or they might be, the biggest fear that everyone says is, being thrown and, not knowing how to properly land. Is there anything that, we as, local coaches can do to be able to spread like, hey, this isn't as scary as it might be, this is how I properly do it, because, at the highest level, everything seems seamless. The guy gets thrown, but he lands softly, and it, they've been doing it for years and they're not scared. Places like Illinois, their junior team has 100, 150 kids every year doing it, so where do you think the divide or the apprehension is with, getting coaches to jump on to teaching Greco in their rooms in season and off season?
Oh, I do think it's probably a lot of it is hubris, you know, it's because um, they don't want to have to start over. And it's the same thing that we talked about with some of these really successful Division I college athletes, you know, that I look at and go, man, that guy could really develop into a Greco-Roman wrestler, but they don't want to put the time and the effort in because they already know how hard it is. They already know to how hard it was to get to this level that they're at in the college ranks, and now they're talking about, you know, going international, and they look at that as just an impossible hill to climb. And there's a little bit of ego in there that says, I don't want to lose first. I don't want to have a bunch of fails on my way to success. But as most of us know, that, you know, that's pretty much the only way you learn to succeed is by trying and failing and making adjustments and making some changes and adapting, you know, different changes into your training and your competition. So it's just that experimentation of you have to love the sport, I think,
Yeah.
is the bottom line, because the sport is so hard as it is. You hear guys talk about, oh, I'm tired, I'm burnt out. I guess the fact that I've never felt that, I don't know what that's like. I don't know, um, you know, to not want to be around the sport. Right now we're being forced to stop training, and you know, what are we doing? We're calling it social distancing, but it's literally, it's physically distancing. Look at us, we're being social right here on using technology to, you know, socially connect. So I just think that's not really the accurate term for that. I think we're physically
Yeah.
distancing. um, but it's honestly, it's effort, it's time, and where do you want to spend your time? And so you have to make a conscious decision that I want to spend my time getting better at Greco-Roman wrestling, and that could take years. Like I talked about my journey, it took way longer than I ever anticipated. It was way harder than I was sold. You know, it's like, well, you should try this. You could potentially, you know, get on Olympic team someday and get, you know, go to a world championships. And, you know, maybe I was just naive enough to believe it, but I also enjoyed the journey, the struggle, the training, the sacrifices, the camaraderie of being with my teammates, so much that I was willing to go through those struggles and make those sacrifices and put that time and energy in. And I think that's really what it comes down to. The bottom line is, you know, how much time, energy, effort am I willing to put into this? And you can see that there's not a lot of people out there that are willing to do that.
I think that's a interesting concept to bring up, about how hard it is, right? There's a lot of people that aren't willing to convince themselves, you know, on a mental level that, like, I can do this, because they don't want to be thrown every day. But you can have kind of like the part-time wrestling mentality if you're doing folk style. You know, you can, you know, do a ton of other sports and still, you know, have success at folk style, and honestly, even freestyle too. But Greco so far has proven to be, you know, the most difficult style of wrestling as far as like training situations or just being able to, you know, have a place to practice high quality Greco. So it is more of a challenge in the US to decide, like, okay, I'm doing Greco. But the types of people that you find doing the style are the ones that don't mind a challenge. You know, those are the ones that are really, like, you know, fighters. So I think that definitely holds a lot of people up. But, you know, you get a lot of good characters like within the sport of Greco-Roman wrestling.
We got a lot of quality individuals that compete in our style of wrestling, and you're probably right, Logan. It is more of a pure martial art. We've turned all these martial arts of wrestling into sports, but I think the one style that's remained, you know, the purest and the rawest as far as being close to a martial art would be Greco-Roman wrestling, because you look at the other styles, and just to pick your opponent up and throw him over your head is illegal in college wrestling. And, that's probably the most effective use of wrestling martial art, is to use gravity to your advantage, to lift a guy and drive him through the earth, or, in the wrestling world, we call it through the mat, but it's really just the ground. We use a padded surface for sport and for training and competition to protect our athletes. But when you look at it as a true martial art, you know, you, how effective is it to take an opponent off the ground and turn him upside down and return him to the ground on his head? I mean, that's pretty effective as far as a martial art. And so you're right. It really is a much more raw, pure style.
Now, do you think MMA will impact Greco positively? Do you think it will have no effect? Is Greco, would you consider one of the easiest transitions from wrestling to MMA? And because I mean, you were a MMA champion, so you would have the best insight on this. Is there anything or any advantages that Greco would have with MMA and vice versa?
Well, I definitely think so, and I don't think anything was an easy transition. It might be an easy to transition into the sport, but to become a champion, or to be a very successful mixed martial arts fighter, it's certainly none of the transfers skills are going to be easy. It's again, it's that sacrifice and struggle, but it's enjoying what you're doing, and I think I was able to enjoy some success in mixed martial arts because I enjoyed the training and competition as much as I did, in wrestling. And I got an opportunity to learn all new disciplines, learn the striking, learn the punching, the kicking, the submission holds, which was probably the area that I gravitated the most towards, where I found that I could have a lot more success was with submissions, using leverage and attacking the opponent's joints. So, yes, personally, I do think that Greco-Roman is a better transfer of skills, just because the fight is more upright. You're not bent over at the waist, and it's certainly, like we talked about earlier, it's certainly more of a risk-taking sport. It's more offensive. It's about attacking. It's about going first and being first. It's not sitting back and waiting. Now, certainly there's athletes that have more of a counter style of punching, or they'll defend a takedown and roll into a submission. So they're being more defensive in that moment. But I don't think it's a defensive sport. I think it's a very offensive, risk-taking sport, just like we talked about in Greco-Roman, how taking risk is critical to success.
Yeah,
Now,
I mean,
sorry.
oh, I was just gonna talk about being offensive. Like, there's a rule about not being offensive. Like, you get hit with passivity, like you're going down, probably gonna get scored on. So pays to be the aggressor.
Yeah, the current rule sets in Greco-Roman, I mean, I really like it. Now, philosophically, I've had discussions with other experts in the sports, and coaches, and Olympic champions that say, the goal of wrestling is to put an opponent on his back and pin him. I mean, that's the ultimate goal, is to take a man from his feet, put him on his back, and pin him. And to give that guy a free opportunity on top is they don't think that that's right. But the current rule set says that if you're not uh, attacking, you're not making offensive risk, you're not taking those risks, you're considered passive in the sport, and the penalty is harsh to put a guy on the mat with his lines of defense facing the mat, and then you get to attack him from behind, lock your arms around him, and attempt to turn him or lift him off the mat. I think is a pretty motivating punishment to make athletes be more aggressive, because just the tactics and the strategies start to fall into wrestling, and it becomes more boring. People don't want to watch it, but when there's a lot of throws and a lot of actions, that creates a lot of excitement, and people want to enjoy the sport as a spectator. And really, that's what we're trying to do, is entertain our fans. And so, going back to what we were talking about, the philosophies of the two different sports, people want to see scoring, and and action and risk. And so I think that's in my opinion what makes Greco-Roman way more exciting. I don't understand the excitement behind the NCAA's as much as other fans of that sport, because it's not as dynamic and exciting to me.
What were the fans like in other countries for Greco?
It depends on what countries you're in. Like the Scandinavian, the Baltic countries, I'd say the fans are very knowledgeable. They're knowledgeable. You go to countries like Iran, and they're so excited just to be around the sport, watch the sport. It doesn't matter win, lose. They just want to see the action. They want to see the big throws and the skill set of the athletes. So they appreciate the sport at a little higher level. Um, but all over the world, I think the cultures are different. I mean, you ever watch, like UFC in the United States versus Pride in Japan? It's completely different audiences. You can have 30,000 people in an arena in Tokyo in the Superdome there, and you can hear a pin drop because they're just waiting to watch the athletes in this anticipation of, like this is exciting, and then you watch a UFC in the United States and it's like, kill him, F him up, man. It's just a different mentality, different cultures appreciate the sports differently. And I think we as Americans have a reverence for the college programs and seeing athletes have success, because these guys aren't doing it full time. They're having success uh, doing this as a part time. Their first priority is being a student, and they make that known, student athlete. So sport is secondary. In some nations, sport is primary. It's it's just different
Yeah.
all over the world, Logan, for sure. I don't know how much you've had the opportunity to travel and compete overseas recently, but every nation I've been to has a little different culture of wrestling, especially like we're just recently in Canada, and our sport is not very popular in North America in general, and Canada even probably less so because they don't have the college system even.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I've heard the Greco scene's not too hot in Canada.
No, it's not. It's not at all.
Hmm.
Now, so with the sport growing internationally, South America has taken a large attraction to Greco-Roman. I mean, countries like Venezuela, Colombia. I mean, and then the traditional ones like Cuba. Now, what do you think drew them to Greco instead of going the traditional, freestyle route in North America?
Good question. And I think there's a couple reasons. I think first of all, you look at the where Cuba's had a lot of success, and it was in their Greco-Roman, and a lot of those coaches. It's what we talked about earlier, was sending coaches out, and Venezuela has a Cuban coach, Chile has a Cuban coach, Guatemala has a Cuban coach, Mexico. You start looking, and all these great wrestlers that came out of Cuba in the late '80s, '90s, early 2000s, and then they're still producing great athletes. I mean, to this day, Cuba's um, one of the only team in Greco-Roman that's got all six weights qualified for the Olympics. So arguably, you could say they're one of the best programs absolutely in the world, and they have a great system, and they've been sending their coaches to all these other countries, and these are Greco-Roman coaches. So what are they going to coach? They're going to coach Greco-Roman. But I also think when you're in the United States and you're talking about how do you attract more athletes to our style of wrestling, Greco-Roman, you kind of look at the depth chart and go, man, look at freestyle. They're stacked up at those weight classes. Some of those weight classes, you've got world champions, Olympic champions that won't make the team in freestyle. We know that there's going to be Olympic and world champions sitting home, not going to the Olympics because they're going to lose to another world or Olympic champion. And you look at the Greco-Roman depth chart and you go, there's a little more room in there. Maybe when I get to the international level, it's gonna be a little different. There's gonna be much more depth within there, but just getting the opportunity to be on a national team, that gives you an opportunity to get overseas more, train more, get more opportunities for competition. And I think that's what led to my success in Greco-Roman. Was I'd already won a couple national titles in freestyle, and won a Pan American gold medal in freestyle. Beat Alexi Rodriguez in 1994 in the Pan Americans. And I used Greco-Roman gut wrench defense, to trap an elbow and step over and catch my opponent on his back in that match. But it was freestyle. But then when I started making national teams, that created more opportunities for me to travel and compete against the best competitors in the world and kind of see where I stacked up, and then look at what adjustments I'm going to have to make to get to that next level, to not be competitive, but to beat these athletes and beat them at the right times, world championships and Olympic games.
Did you have like a defining tournament where you're like, okay, I'm world class now?
No, I don't know if I ever did that. I don't know if I ever had that moment where I said that, because I think as soon as you start thinking that way, for sure you're gonna get beat. As soon as you start thinking, man, I've got this figured out, and I think every time those thoughts slipped into my mind, I didn't win those matches. Boy, I've got this. I've figured it out. I think it's always constant improvement, constant learning. How can I get better? Because I mean, you're competing against, you know, the elite of the elite, the best of the best, in your field. I don't know if you could do that anywhere, Logan, where you could say, I got this. I'd hate to go to a surgeon that's like, no matter, he feels this confidence of, I'm the best at this. It's like, I want you to be good for sure, but I don't want you to be overly confident either. So um, I don't know if I ever could say I felt that way. I could definitely say that I've had moments where I'm like, okay, this was a good event, this was a good tournament. I can take some positive things from this, but I think there's always areas where you're always looking to improve. You definitely want to give yourself a pat on the back sometimes and say, you know what, that was good, and evaluate and go, here's what was good, and then look over the tournament as a whole and say, this is where I can improve, this is where I could do better. Whether it was, back, in my nutrition, my strength program, my training, or how I mentally prepared leading up to the competition, or how I mentally prepared stepping onto the mat, that pre-match preparation, my warm-up, how, my cool downs in between rounds. I think there's always areas where you can look and say, where can I get better? But again, you definitely want to say, okay, I am having success, I'm doing good, and then you want to look at what you did to have that success and try to replicate those things and fix the other things. So no, you never want. I've never sat back and gone, oh yeah, I've got this figured out.
Yeah,
Now,
that's oh, go ahead.
so go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
I was gonna say that's a very important part of like loving the process, is like having that reality check and just knowing like, okay, yeah, things are working out, but there's always something else that you can build on and improve on.
Absolutely. Nick, go ahead. You were going to say something?
Oh yeah, I was gonna kind of keep with the topic, but kind of get into the coaching philosophy aspect of your tenure in Greco. When you are recruiting individuals to come out to the sport of Greco, or come train at the OTC, what sort of characteristics, personality traits are you looking for in an athlete when you're recruiting them? And I guess a second kind of two-part question is there a personality trait or characteristics that kind of define Greco-Roman in the United States? For example, you see a lot of the Greco-Roman national team athletes, they're sleeping on top of a mountain, they're hunting, they're traveling like a ton to go train with other teams. it's kind of like that fearlessness, that high adventure sort of characteristic. Is that a overwhelming majority of the athletes? And is that what you're looking for when you are looking for athletes?
I definitely think that there's that risk taking factor. Uh, you want to get somebody that's a little that you can say that guy's got some fearless qualities. He's brave. He's willing to take risks, for sure. But no, I think our athletes are so diverse. They come from very diverse backgrounds and different philosophies and thoughts. Some guys that are, super rugged and tough, and then you got other guys that are just super athletic and explosive. I think definitely the quality that I appreciate is durability. And describe durability would be somebody that's able to train, recover, and repeat, and so sustain from getting injuries. And that also requires, not getting injured requires a lot of discipline. You got to, stretch out, you got to stay fit. I mean, all those things that go into it help you not get injuries because you're recovering properly. um, so I don't know if I have a specific type of an athlete. I think the athlete that I want to recruit is somebody that says, this is what I want to do. I've made my mind up. I've found out that I really appreciate the art of Greco-Roman, and I want to study it more, and I want to get a deeper knowledge of this. And I have a desire to compete, and compete doesn't necessarily always mean win. I want to have the desire to compete, to find out what it's going to take to win and get those experiences. But yeah, I think you nailed it on the head with, you look at our guys they're willing to take those trips overseas and, spend a month in Europe, getting on trains and planes and traveling, and maybe not staying in the greatest environments. We had a pretty rugged trip over to Georgia last fall, kind of start this year off. That was after the World Championship. After the World Championships, we sent a group of athletes over to Georgia for 2 weeks of training, and it was, I think some of them were 3-4 to a room. The food was okay, but the training environments were pretty rough. But the quality of training partners and coaching was at its highest level. So you had to make those sacrifices and say, well, to get to train with some of the best guys in the world and some of the best coaches on the planet, I'm going to have to, bunk 3 or 4 to a room, and I'm going to have to, travel to this country and, stay in rough environments and eat their food, and just be willing to be out of my comfort zone for a period of time. So I think we're all dealing with that right now. I think there's a lot of people that are completely out of their comfort zone. And, we talk about, learning to be comfortable being uncomfortable, right? I think that these guys that do that are willing to do that, have a big advantage over other individuals that don't take those opportunities. You know what? I would go if they had a better hotel. I would go if, the food was better. I would take that trip. All those guys. No, it's the guys that say, I don't care what the situation is. If I'm going to get myself in an environment where I can train and improve, I'm willing to do that, no matter what it takes, no matter the cost and the sacrifice. Um, I think those are the type of individuals I would like to see in our program. Guys that are just willing to fight, because every athlete's going to have his own style of wrestling and his own artistic flair to the sport. It's an art. It's a martial art, and just like any other artist, um, you need to be creative, and you need to find out what your style of art is and how it works best for you.
Now, kind of keeping with this, line of questions, is there a culture or a philosophy that you promote with your athletes? And then do you think that there's any sort of cultural differences between the senior freestyle team and the Greco team? I don't know if that question necessarily makes sense, but, is there differences that you see between the two teams just outside of the traditional rule sets?
Good question. I mean, there's two parts there. The first one is what would my philosophy be with Greco-Roman? My personal philosophy is to be brave and take risks. Uh, so, and then that's pretty lined up with the what our sport requires. The philosophy of our sport is to be brave and take risks. And we've definitely had. If you go to my YouTube channel, you'll see my guys walking across logs, you know, over rivers and doing different types of risky maneuvers. I take my athletes out on whitewater. I've been a professional whitewater racer for 7 years. I've competed, not only in two martial arts at the highest levels, but I've also had the opportunity to compete in whitewater racing at the highest level nationally. I've never made a world team. We were second one year in nationals and almost got an opportunity to go to the world championships, but didn't get that. But again, that's while I was still training and competing, while I had other passions and going another direction. Is the culture? Yeah, I think the cultures are definitely different in freestyle and Greco, but I can't necessarily put my finger on what that is. Um, I don't know. Maybe what do you see? What do you guys see the difference culturally is um, between the two sports?
Well, I'll start off. I think that there's the more of a high adventure culture in Greco compared to freestyle. Personally, I just think that there's like we've been talking about, a lot more risk taking. They're more adventurous. They're more willing to try things. Where I think freestyle kind of, since there's so many, it's just kind of like the base of what we're doing. The United States does. I don't see as many athletes maybe taking risks or doing these high adventure things. And this is, again, I don't know the athletes personally. I'm just kind of seeing it through a lens of social media and what they've been putting out there. So like a guy like Patrick Martinez, I see is on the top of a mountain in like Sweden or something, but another athlete in freestyle, I don't necessarily see them doing those sort of things. And so I think there's more of a like we've been keeping with a risk factor, a high adventure spirit that drives Greco-Roman, and that's why these athletes continue to do the sport, and that's why new athletes are joining, because they want that high adventure feel.
I think that's a really good point, Nick. I think you're right. I do see a lot of that through the same lenses that you're looking at. The guys that are posting these incredible adventures, like me and Joe Rao going over to Mongolia and riding horses and camels and playing with birds of prey and in the what do they call that the steppe in Mongolia. And we didn't know what that day was going to entail, but we did know that we wanted to get an adventure in. And I think that probably makes a lot of sense because it is a very different art than the American system is um, accustomed to. And so they're like, well, this freestyle is very similar to what I've grown up doing. I'm very comfortable here. It's not a big stretch. Um, and to be a Greco-Roman athlete, yeah, maybe you have to really step outside of your comfort zone and say, wow, this is completely different. I have to figure out a new skill sets. I gotta, I can take some of the fundamentals, stance, motion, movements, and transfer those skills and I think there are a lot of skill transfers. We talked about that earlier with transferring skills from wrestling to mixed martial arts. And when I started paddling, it was like I was using all my arms. I didn't have any technique, and I was just completely fatigued. And then when I learned to stick my paddle and my blade in the water and twist and use my core, I was like, oh, it just clicked. It's like, wait a minute, I actually have a really really good aptitude to this because of all the years I've spent using my core and twisting and rotating my core. I'm able to generate a lot more power than other athletes that are paddling with me. So you learn that the skill transfers, but also being willing to take those risks. And the same thing. It's like I learned to paddle in a raft with a team. wrestling is, and it was the only sport I'd ever done as a team. You know, I was an equestrian athlete, I was a wrestler, I was a mixed martial artist. All sports where you go out on your own as an individual. You step into the field of play, the mat, the arena, whatever that is, the step on the or get on the water. So you stepping into that field of play as an individual. I started out in rafting as a team. And then from there, I went back to kayaking, which is way more individual. Um, so it was quite a journey to be able to get that experience of what it's like to work with a team, and I really enjoyed it. I appreciated those teamwork elements, and we have a lot of opportunities to do that in Greco-Roman as well. Even though it's an individual sport, we really focus on raising the whole program, not just raising the individuals, but raising the program and taking as many guys overseas as we can to get those experiences and get those opportunities to take chances and take in new experiences. So I think that is really profound statement that you're saying, they're comfortable, they're not willing to step outside of their comfort zone as much, and maybe that's what we should be going after. Some athletes that have a propensity to take risks and our willingness to step outside of their comfort zone in other areas of life. Maybe those would transfer over as well. So great, yeah, great point.
Logan, did you want to add anything, or you can take the next question?
Oh, no, I as an entrepreneur, I could see how, that's transferable to the style of wrestling that I do. you know, I come up with my own ideas and then I send them out to the world. And when you're like getting to, everybody has a specific lock, like for a lift that they like, or for a gut wrench, right? Like you have to be creative and like find a way to score in wrestling. And like, I don't know, it's kind of just the same thing as coming up with ideas, when you're running a company. So I don't know, to me, it's relatable. It makes sense that, Greco-Roman wrestlers are typically the ones that are thinking of like, you know, being creative or new ways to do things, because that's really what you have to do, in a Greco situation. You're
Yeah,
body to
well,
body with somebody. Oh,
I think you're right. And I think a lot of our American coaching system is like this show and tell. It's like here's how I do it. And I've heard this over and over and over of coaches, like, this is where you put your foot, this is where you put your hand, and it's like you show these moves and these progressions of these techniques, and then you gather all these techniques up and you try to put them in like a puzzle, instead of focusing on stance and position and using your legs and just really being disciplined on, head up, butt down, hips in, um, elbows tight, don't give up underhooks, and then let the art flow from there. So once you've built that discipline, that structure, that base, you can kind of let the art flow from there, instead of saying, this is how you have to do it. And we see even the best in every style is going to develop their own artistic flair. But I think it comes more from the way we have coached as Americans for a long time of I'll show you how to do it, now you copy this. And I've certainly, when Nick asked me about philosophy, that is certainly not the way that I would coach. I would show positions and show what could happen if somebody took those risks in those positions. But maybe somebody's got that hips or the move that's like, what do you think of this? I've had guys ask me, what do you think of this? And my first response is, does it work? Is it effective? Now let's break it down and look at where the possible flaws are. But first of all, does it work and does it score points? Well, great. We got a starting point. And I don't care if I've never seen this technique before. Now we'll break it down and say, does it have these pieces that go with it? Does it create lift? Let's go back to the the fundamentals, and let's go back to those basic skills. Does it have lift? Does it have pop and arch? All those type of things. It doesn't really matter how you got there, right? If you can replicate it again and again and again and is effective, use that technique.
Yeah, I think Greco is one of those incredible art forms that really come to play because, the scoring is like it's a razor thin margin. I mean, there's not as many opportunities to score, but when you do and you see something, it is very exciting and riveting to see. Like I know in an interview I was listening to with Tim Hans, he was talking about how, in freestyle you need two big names to go at it because that's what draws in the crowd. But with Greco-Roman, two guys can just go out and throw each other and people are going to be going crazy. And I think that's one of the best things about Greco-Roman is, it lets you go and try these things and take those risks and make an art form out of it where, I feel like sometimes folk style can be very just rigid and it's just like, okay, you have to do a double leg, you have to do a stand up, you have to do a half Nelson, and that's it. And, I think Greco is one of those forms where it's so fluid that it really makes, that's what, some of the exciting aspect of it is.
Yeah, well, and I think they're focusing on the results a little more in college. It's like it's all about the wins and the points and the scores, and instead of the constant improvement of that risk, and that risk leads to you making adjustments and improving your position. So just a little different philosophically. We definitely want to win, but we focus more on the process instead of focusing on the wins. We focus on what it's going to take to get the wins, and then let the wins happen. But if your mind's constantly thinking about winning, sometimes you're not willing to get better. You're not willing to try new things and see how far you can really go. And that's really what it's going to take is you're going to have to get out there and take chances and take those opportunities when they present themselves, and you can look at that move and go, oh, I should have done that, oh, I should have. And you do that one or two times, you're going to lose that match. And the times you don't even think about it, it just is a reaction. You see an opportunity, you take hold and you score. That's when the success starts to happen.
Yeah. So speaking of success and kind of going through that, what is your, near and far term goals for Greco-Roman in the United States? What can we do to support your mission in the growth of it? Logan being aspiring to be a, world team member and myself trying to be a full-time, cadet junior Greco coach. What can we do to help you in your mission in the growth? And what are those goals that you have?
Well, the immediate goal right now is to get back on the mats for sure.
Yeah.
After that, I think it's going to be focusing on building a plan to qualify our two remaining weight classes, 77 and 130, which are some of our strongest and deepest weight classes in the United States. We got a world medalist. We got a world champion at 77 from the juniors. Um, you look at, you had Mason Manville, you had Pat Smith, you had Kamal Bay, and there's now Ben Provisor's down to 77, who's already been a two-time Olympian. I mean, the depth at those two weights is very encouraging because I know we got some really, really quality athletes and individuals going out and competing. And then you look at, 130, you've got Adam and Colton's right behind him with 3 world medals in the age group divisions. Jacob Mitchell, Robbie Smith still a threat to the program, who's been 5th in the world twice. So 2 weight classes where we got a lot of depth. So my biggest priority is figuring out a plan to get those 2 weights qualified. What kind of training do we need? What kind of competition schedule do they need? And then get those guys qualified so we can take 6 athletes to the Olympic Games. And then 2021 now is our new target for the Olympics. But as far as growth goes and what you and other coaches out there could do would be just to continue to stay engaged with Gary and myself and get to camps. It's the same thing I would tell an athlete that's starting to come up. Like Logan came at reached out to me and said, "Hey, can I come train?" I said, "Absolutely. Here's what it takes. You know, you got to fill out these forms, this paperwork. Got to get your facility use. You can definitely come train with us and be a part of this and expose yourself to it. So get yourself around the best training partners, best coaching you can find, wherever that is. If that's domestically, great. If it's overseas, even better sometimes. Um, and so putting yourself in those different environments. So when we decide to invest our resources, our national team money into athletes, our national team members, we're always looking for them to invest in themselves first. So it's kind of the philosophy of, you want to do this, so what have you done? How many trips have you taken overseas? How many times have you gone over and competed and trained? How many international athletes have you brought over to train with you to raise your level? And then we start to look at what you're doing, how much you're investing, and from there we know that we're going to see growth because you're investing your time, your effort, your energy into that. And so we want to start pouring into coaches and the same way we do athletes and saying, "Hey, let us fund this trip." And with coaches, we do the same thing. There's only so many, we fund a Junior Worlds, a Pan Am trip, cadets, and U23 for our coaches, and a senior coach every year. So we, as a national program, we fund those positions every year for our volunteers. And we have a lot of coaches out there going, "Man, oh, I want to get on that. I'm putting my time in." Um, but maybe we're not seeing that. Maybe we're not seeing you at those national clinics. We haven't seen you come out to the training center. You haven't reached out and said, "Here's how I'm going to bring 50 guys to." Where you at, Nick? You're out east.
Yeah, we're in DC
You're
area.
in DC. Okay,
Yeah.
so you're in DC area. Um, so Nick's going to say, "Hey, Coach Mab, I'm going to get 50 athletes from Maryland, DC, and Virginia, and I've got this venue. And what will you fly out for these 2 days? I'm gonna coordinate this and host this and get you all the best athletes in our area, and I'm gonna bring in 6 other coaches that want to coach Greco-Roman wrestling." And then the next time he's gonna say, "Oh, I've got a camp and I've got an extra bed. Oh, you know what? Who was investing in our program? Who was investing in their own education, getting better? You know what? Nick was doing that for me last year in DC. You know what? I'm going to bring him to the training center this year. I'm going to give him an opportunity to take a team overseas to Croatia this year." And it just kind of happens like that. It's like, I'm going to invest in me, and we're going to invest in you as a national program, and we want to see coaches do that. So the great question, how do you get more involved, is get to those events, get to those clinics, get yourself overseas, figure out, look at the calendar domestically and look at the calendar internationally and say, these are the events I'm going to go to. They fit into my schedule, and communicate that with our coaches, our national staff, and let us know how we can support that. And then we know what you're doing. And then when we have opportunities to bring coaches in for clinics and camps and get them on tours, that you're top of our mind because you've been contributing so much to our programs, and you've been making an effort to get more athletes involved, get them, raise their level. So we're looking for all those things. Nick, did that answer your question?
Oh yeah, perfectly.
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
Logan, any last? We're a little over time, so Logan, any last questions before we give Coach the last word?
Yeah, no, thank you, Coach, for your time. And sharing your story with us. You gave a lot of good insight and philosophy. So as someone that's pursuing Greco, I really cherish and appreciate that. And then from a coaching standpoint and philosophy of how to grow the sport, that was gold. So thank you.
Awesome. Well, good. Well, I hope you're really utilizing Nick, and you guys, as you're coming up as a newer Greco-Roman athlete, and Nick's coming up as a Greco-Roman coach. I really encourage you guys to work together. It sounds like you guys got a great relationship and you're in the similar areas. Um, get opportunities to help one another, and whether you're better than Nick at Greco-Roman at this moment, or not, make each other better, help raise each other's level. You as an athlete sharing what you learned with your coach, and your coaches, if Nick's coaching you sometimes, have him, be willing to take his input and his what he sees, because he's got a different perspective. He's looking at things from a completely different angle, and maybe there's something that he sees that you didn't see in yourself, Logan. And you can learn from every single coach out there, especially if they got a passion to grow the sport and grow their athletes, and they want to help you succeed. So um, utilize each other to help grow yourselves as coaches and as an athlete as well, and have fun with this. So
Absolutely. Yeah.
Well, thank you again for your time. We know you're super busy and you got a lot of wrestling things you got to get back to. So again, this has been an unreal opportunity to be able to talk to the national head coach of the Greco-Roman team. And hopefully we look forward to hearing from you soon.
thank you, gentlemen.
Yeah,
Have a
have a
great
good one.
day.
Thank you. Yep. Take care.